Hi again, everyone. I was enjoying chapter 3 so much, and chapter 4 is connected to it. I'm going to record chapter 4 straight afterwards so we can keep going. And I'll release them simultaneously as well, and you can watch them at your leisure or listen to them at your leisure. So here we go. Chapter 4. Finally, Urania declared, "As I remember Angus's stories and look at what has happened today, I sense a greater story unfolding. Do you two remember when he told us about how Arthur was conceived?" "Yes," said Alan. "There was a lot of similarities to what happened to our parents, but there are also a few big differences." You are always good at seeing the patterns in life," said Urania. "Let's look at those differences after we hear what Elwyn remembers of that story." Alan sat back and waited. He had long ago learned that when Elwyn was invited to contribute, something amazing was likely to emerge. Even at their age, when he still teased her a lot, he knew he could trust her perception. Elwyn appeared bemused for a short while. Then she began to speak. "Well, I remember Uther, the king before Arthur, fell in lust, as Angus called it, with Igraine, the wife of the Duke of Cornwall. Igraine was a young woman who radiated beauty and femininity. I guess Uther, who was cut off from true feminine energy, felt a desperate longing for it in his gut and translated that into compulsive lust." "Gee, Elwyn, where do you get those big words?" joked Ellen a little uneasily. Elwyn flashed her eyes at Alan to let him know she knew what he was going through and went on. "As the Duke of Cornwall was one of Uther's vassals, Uther had to be devious in his pursuit of Igraine. He asked Merlin for help. At first Merlin refused, as only Merlin could do to him. But Uther persisted, and Merlin realised this was a chance to initiate his vision for creating a better world. Merlin was a dreamer. He dreamt of living in a world where differences were respected and celebrated. Personally, he dreamt of a world where he could live without shame or hostility. The son of a human mother and a fairy father, he understood what it was like to feel alienated in both worlds. As a visionary, he saw that a tolerant world would allow people to love in the way that was right for them. It would enable people to safely reveal their unique gifts and powers. Only in a world like this would true magic come back to life and humans realise their potential." "You got all that from Angus telling us the legend?" gasped Ellen. "Well, I've been sitting with it for over a decade now," said Elwyn, "as have you. True legends offer you more than the internet," stated Urania. "They download vast knowledge in easy-to-absorb form. You find your own truths and greater truths if you enjoy and explore them. Wait till you share your understanding of the legend, Alan. It will enthrall us and you too." "Okay, I trust you, sis, I really do. If we are going to survive Adrian, I guess we have to fully trust each other and what we each have to offer," said Alan, looking down. The room became so still that Alan looked up quickly, feeling he had said something wrong. He was surprised to find the two women beaming at him. "What?" he asked awkwardly. Alan and Urania looked at each other and burst into laughter. "Men" was all they could say in the midst of their amusement. As Alan became embarrassed, Elwyn stopped laughing and said sincerely, "That was beautiful, Alan, and so true." "Oh, it was? I meant it was, wasn't it? Good. So you should continue," he invited Elwyn to take the focus off himself, for once. For Elwyn, having been invited, the floodgates opened again. So Merlin agreed to help Uther, but demanded something in return. Any child conceived of this affair was to be given to Merlin at birth, no questions asked. At that time, Uther was too blinded by lust to argue, so he agreed. When they were ready, Uther sent a message to the Duke, sending him on an overnight journey. After the Duke had left his stronghold at Tintagel, Merlin used a unique fairy magic to disguise Uther. This magic reveals the true nature of a person. So at first, Uther appeared to turn into a ravenous wolf. Then Merlin worked with this wolf form to shape-shift Uther into the likeness of the Duke. Uther was able to approach the castle with the stealth of a wolf and then appear to the guards as the Duke returning unexpectedly. Once he gained entrance to the castle, he ordered the servants to take him to Igraine and leave them together for the night. Morgane, Igraine's first child, saw through Uther's deception, so Uther had her removed from their chambers. Uther then had his way with Igraine, who still believed he was a husband. After Uther, alias the Duke, left next morning, news arrived that Igraine's husband and his guard had been attacked on the road and killed by unknown assailants. His assassination was arranged by Uther without Merlin's knowing. A confused and traumatised Igraine was left with no lord and husband to protect her and Morgane. So Uther stepped in and took her and her kingdom under his personal protection, claiming it was his duty to his former vassal. Adding salt to the wound of her tragedy, Igraine and Morgane were forced to live at Uther's court, a real den of iniquity. There Igraine found she was pregnant by Uther and gave birth to a young boy she named Arthur. As the birth was progressing, Merlin unexpectedly arrived at court and went straight to Uther. As soon as the boy was born, Arthur was taken from Igraine without explanation. You can imagine what Igraine went through. Uther was reluctant to hand over a new son, but Merlin was adamant about keeping their agreement, knowing Merlin could reveal the whole deception and was too powerful to be messed with. Arthur was handed over. Merlin immediately took Arthur away from the toxic influences of Uther's court. Arthur was placed in care of friends of Merlin, a retired knight, his wife, and their son. They lived a simple life in the forest. Over the next decade or more, Merlin involved himself in Arthur's education and growth. Igraine and Morgane continued to live at Uther's court. This experience shaped their lives powerfully. As unhealthy as their situation was, it gave them a chance and they took it. Igraine, unlike most women of her time, was not overwhelmed by the tragedies she faced. The more vulnerable she became, the more her true power revealed itself. Yes, she was beautiful for a woman of those days, but what shone through all the craziness of her life was her dignity. She had dignity when she was the Duchess of Cornwall, but it was youthful. It emerged fully as she weathered each loss and crisis in her life with Uther. Even Uther came to value her presence above her looks. There were times when only she kept him sane as age and the excesses of his lifestyle began to drag him down into despair. Morgane knew all along what Uther had done. However, being her mother's daughter, this knowledge only deepened her perception and insight. Her anger, grief, and outrage, which in many people would turn to bitterness, became her tools for growth. By facing them in herself, she saw clearly the sources of disharmony in other men and women. From her anger, she learned self-determination. From her grief, she learned forgiveness. And from her rage, she learned wisdom. A gifted child, she grew into a powerful young woman who could challenge others, especially men, to be their best. Now that could have got her into a lot of trouble with Uther and his men. However, she was drawn to Merlin on his visits to court when others shied away from him in fear. Merlin saw her potential and began to help her develop it. Their friendship kept her safe. In time, they became true allies. Ellen jumped in, saying, "Urania, I never got to ask Angus about this, but history, books and movies all portray Morgane as a wicked, scheming, evil woman. All they say about Igraine is that she was a poor victim of Uther's abuse. That's not how Angus told it. It amazes me how deeply held this belief is. Why is that?" Urania turned to Elwyn and asked, "Why do you think this is so, Elwyn?" "Well, I trust Angus's version because it feels right to me, to be honest. It inspires me as a young woman to see the essential role we play in life rather than focusing on how much trouble we can cause. I guess historically, many men and institutions saw powerful women as a threat to their vested interests, so they denied or demonised these women. I mean, look at Morgane. She was a woman who, out of love for men's potential, challenged them to be their best. She ended up in stories as an evil, manipulative witch/bitch. What worries me, Grandma, is that many women my age and older take this bad press seriously. I have girlfriends who act it out as though it's normal." "You're right," Urania sighed. "Don't get me started on what they did to Guinevere, turning her into a love-lost slut. That started with the help of a woman, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Does that help, Ellen?" "You two are a couple of whistleblowers," he joked. "Yeah, that makes sense. But how does that help us with Adrienne?" "Exactly," said Urania. "What were the differences you noted between the legend and your problem?" "Well, both Elwyn and I were taken to the forest to be with Angus and you. That's a big difference. And soon I have to face living with Adrienne, which never happened to Arthur with Uther. There are other differences, but those two really stood out to me." "The plot thickens," commented Urania. "See, a true legend is alive. It grows and evolves just as easily as it can be twisted and distorted. It is a clear map, but it's not set in stone. Let me ask you both, what do you remember of the time when Arthur and Merlin fell short?" In response, Ellen jumped in. "Well, Camelot had been working like a charm for decades. Then as Arthur got to his 50s, he began to doubt himself as a man. Rather than face his doubts, He decided he would prove to Guinevere that he still had what it takes. Morgane picked up on this. She tried to convince Merlin and then Arthur that something was wrong. Neither of them understood what she was talking about until it was too late. Rather than face his self-doubts, Arthur went to war again. He won the battle, but missed the opportunity to grow. Also, Merlin didn't see that he was doing the magic for Arthur and not empowering Arthur to do magic himself. When they finally understood this, the momentum they needed to sustain Camelot in a chaotic world had been lost. I guessed they were way ahead of their time and they lost traction. Angus said the love and friendship between Arthur and Merlin was so strong that they took it on the chin, forgave their mistakes, and left it to the future to sort this issue out next time around. Alan stopped and looked at the two women. Stated as only Alan could, grinned Urania. Elwyn shook her head and with a big smile said, "Tell it like it is." "Brother?" They both laughed. "You said you would be in awe when I spoke," teased Ellen. "Oh, we are, my lord," said Elwyn with a hand on her heart, her eyes averted and a huge grin. Alan raised his eyebrows, looked down, and inclined his head slightly to his right to acknowledge Elwyn. Then they all burst into laughter. "Okay, what were the turning points in this event?" asked Urania once they'd regained their composure. Arthur not being able to face his self-doubts, and Morgane not being able to get through to Merlin and Arthur, replied Elwyn without hesitation. Then she sighed and said, "I think I'm beginning to see the opportunity here. We can take everything to the next level." "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" she asked Ellen seriously. "About your fascination with Derek?" inquired Alan, looking serious, but with an evil glint in his eyes. "As the earth is consumed by a dying sun, you will stand there teasing the sun about its fascination with Jupiter, dear brother," replied Elwyn, dodging the awkward issue of her latest boyfriend. "That's one way I could save the world from chaos," mused Ellen thoughtfully. "My mother," said Urania, "used to say that many a true word is spoken in jest. Hold that thought, Ellen, and let's pull this together. What were you thinking, Elwyn?" Arthur found it hard to face his shadow, the denied parts of himself, because he never had the opportunity to face his father. He never had the experience he would have gained if he had already faced that negative side of his personal history. But Alan has that opportunity now. What he learns will prepare him to take the next step that Arthur never took in his 50s, which means what he learns now can bring Camelot back to life. And I can learn how to break through male resistance, not just live with it like Morgane did. I can learn how to open their hearts to what I have to say, even when it's difficult for them and I'm not clear. I can win men's trust in my intuition. Alan and I can learn what it takes to make Camelot a reality in our lives. But to do so, we need to face the reality of Adrian and deal with him successfully. "So who is our Merlin?" blurted out Alan. "Great question," replied Urania. "What did you say about Merlin teaching Arthur magic?" Merlin had always been the magician and done the magic. He didn't realise that for Arthur to grow, Arthur needed to learn to do magic For himself, replied Alan. And his way, added Christopher. Rather than comment, Urania stood up and switched off the lights in the room. The rising full moon became more obvious, filling the room with a pearlescent light. A hidden purpose in Urania's decor revealed itself. The walls, furniture, and especially the three crystals captured the moonlight and filled the room with a delicately woven glow that was otherworldly. The crystals had the habit of taking the light and uplifting it. Elwyn called this effect transcendent lighting. Ellen called it lasering, a word he made up from how lasers work. That's not what lasers do, Elwyn would often say to him. It is when they interact with each other in a certain way, he would reply. She would look at him and wonder, what does he know that I don't? Ellen would smile and say no more. Although they had seen light this way in the room before, tonight the radiance was exceptional. Ellen was the first to speak. What are you up to, Grandma? What are we missing? Urania replied, the whole context has changed. Obviously, we live in a different world than Merlin and Arthur. What is not obvious is that we are different human beings than Merlin and Arthur were. They were strategic beings by nature. We are becoming receptive. Their culture was fear-based. Ours is becoming love-based. That's the next step in human evolution. That's what they were exploring with Camelot. We could investigate that for days, even decades, and you will. However, we don't have time for it now. What was Arthur's greatest achievement after founding Camelot, she continued. Bringing the Grail back to the world, they both replied. And what did Angus say about the Grail? Elwyn spoke up as the Grail was dear to her heart. Angus said people think it's a cup or a cauldron, but these are metaphors for the ability to receive. Receiving is a feminine magic that was lost when feminine energy was denied long ago. Arthur sent 5 of his knights, with Merlin's help, on a quest to find this magic and bring it back to awareness. They succeeded in bringing respect for the power of feminine energy back to their world. They showed how this is done. It changed their lives for the better in so many ways. Urania followed on. However, they were still genetically strategic people in a strategic, fear-based world. They pushed the envelope and achieved great things, but could not sustain it. The time in history was not right for that. So when Arthur faced doubts, he naturally took a strategic approach. I'll do what worked in the past, again. Then Merlin and Arthur were challenged by Morgaine, or when Merlin and Arthur were challenged by Morgaine, they couldn't see what was wrong with their current strategy. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. They were not receptive by nature. What they did not realise is that the ultimate exit strategy is to exit strategy. You two have a golden opportunity to take this next step at a time when the forces of evolution are with you. Adrian does not see this. You will need to be very careful with him. He is very dangerous. But dealing with him does not have to be the long, suffering struggle between good and evil of the past. That is the story of an old strategic world of humans or magicians heroes or villains, white or black magic. Hey, that's still fun to watch in the movies or listen to in legends, but it's not what's up now. Now is a time of human magicians, hero villains, and true white-black magic. We are designed to use our differences to create real win-win solutions. Even in the past, the urge to be free of struggle and suffering was what people strived for. Places like Camelot kept that hope alive. They helped people see that a brighter future was out there. It was possible. Merlin was a great and powerful magician. The magic you are capable of now, because you have the DNA structures and awareness to be receptive, even Merlin would see as wonderful and mysterious. Because your formal education was strategic, being receptive can still appear weak or difficult to you. The opposite is true. Today, many children labelled ADHD or autistic have receptive talents. Strategic thinking finds it hard to recognise these talents. Now you too stand on the cutting edge of this change. You face Adrian and all his strategies with your abilities to be who you are by nature, magical humans and adventurers. Your next step on this adventure lies through Adrian and your mother, Urania concluded. With the last rays of the moon passing above the window, with that, the last rays of the moon passed above the windows and the room became dark. So there's hope, said Elwyn. More than you can possibly imagine, said Urania quietly. Protect your eyes, she said, as she rose to switch on the lights. Guess you both should start to pack before you go to bed. Tomorrow morning, as Adrian has been so generous to give us the time, we'll see what further preparation we need to do. Sleep well. End chapter 4. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Great sharing this with you. If you've got as far as chapter 4, you're ready for something really spectacular to start unfolding in your life. And next day or next time, I'll go into chapter 5. Talk to you again soon.